Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another edition of Ukraine This Week with me, Don Arleth. Russia continues to brutally attack Ukraine, targeting civilians and infrastructure and pushing forward on the front lines. But Ukraine is fighting back, imposing its own style of sanctions on Russian oil. In recent weeks, Ukraine has taken out about 20% of Russian oil refining capacity with its long-range drones. On the diplomatic front, security guarantees are still not agreed, nor is a meeting with Zelensky and Putin. And just about every single proposal to end the war is being rejected by Moscow. We'll discuss all this with our two guests, but first up, let's watch this report from Ukraine over the past week. Canadian Prime Minister Mark McNamee made his first visit to Ukraine since taking office in March, joining President Zelensky for a ceremony in central Kyiv to mark Ukrainian Independence Day. The celebration was also attended by Trump's special envoy for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg. The two leaders signed an agreement on joint drone production during the visit, and Carney said Ukraine would receive more than $1 billion in military aid from previously announced package next month.
In parallel, we're investing today $2 billion in new military assistance for Ukraine. $800 million of this will help strengthen Ukraine's arsenal for the most urgently needed defense equipment, drones, ammunition, armored vehicles. And we had a discussion today about specifying and targeting that assistance where it will have the greatest impact, and we will do so.
On Friday, EU defense ministers met in Copenhagen to discuss bolstering military support to Ukraine.
I welcome that there is a broad support today to expand our EU-MEM military mission mandate to provide training and advice inside Ukraine after any truce.
The bloc's military training mission to operate inside Ukraine would be part of those security guarantees. Zelensky, meanwhile, emphasized that security guarantees for Ukraine should include provisions related to military funding, agreements with NATO members, as well as sanctions against Russia.
These are the building blocks I see that form the general scheme. I am not even talking about the geopolitical part. That definitely lies in cooperation with the EU. And when Ukraine becomes a full member, that will also be a security guarantee, primarily an economic one.
The president also said that Ukraine was working in several directions at once, particularly regarding security guarantees. As part of those efforts, the Ukrainian president's chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, held a meeting on Friday in New York with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. Ukrainian flags in Kyiv have been lowered to half-mast as the city mourns its dead following a major Russian attack. People are seen paying their respects at a makeshift memorial next to a residential building destroyed by a Russian missile.
I understand that there is a war going on and military targets may be bombed, but why would they lie to the whole world, saying they only target military objects, while in fact they keep attacking civilians deliberately? This is not the first house, not the second, not the third. There have been so many.
The attack killed at least 23 people and injured dozens, including children. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko blamed Russian President Vladimir Putin for the attack and called for increased pressure on Russia.
Putin is responsible for this war, which he started and does not want to stop. He doesn't just want Donetsk, Luhansk or Crimea. He wants the whole country. He is destroying cities and killing people.
The EU delegation building in Kyiv was also affected, sparking outrage from the bloc's officials.
We will come forward soon with our 19th package of hard-biting sanctions. And in parallel, we are advancing the work on the Russian frozen assets to contribute to Ukraine's defense and reconstruction.
Russian airstrikes were not limited just to Kyiv. As has been the case every week for the past several years, the entire country was under attack. Russia's defense ministry said its forces had successfully targeted and sunk a Ukrainian reconnaissance vessel, the Simferopol, using an unmanned speedboat in the mouth of the Danube River. The incident reportedly occurred on August 28th. The ministry released black and white, soundless footage described as quote-unquote objective damage control, which allegedly captures the moment of the attack. And joining us now is our guest, Dmytro Pletenchuk, spokesman for the Ukrainian Navy. Hello, Dmytro. Thank you so much for joining us here on Ukraine This Week. Appreciate it.
Greetings to the studio. Greetings to your viewers.
So tell me, how did Russia succeed in carrying out such operations with both air and naval drone support?
At the moment, we still need to fully verify which weapon system specifically caused damage to our ship. But yes, unfortunately, Russian aviation is still present in the airspace over the Black Sea. Moreover, I can say that it continues to dominate there, and this has been a problem we've been highlighting throughout the full-scale invasion. The Russians constantly use both drones and tactical and strategic level aviation for reconnaissance and strikes. So yes, sometimes they are able to observe objects in southern Ukraine, despite the daily losses of their drones.
Now, can you tell us about the losses that were incurred and what are the consequences of this attack?
As of now, 2 military sailors are confirmed dead. A few more are currently missing. A search and rescue operation is underway. Several sailors were injured and are receiving treatment in appropriate medical facilities. But the vast majority of the crew was rescued. They acted according to instructions and are safe.
And finally, what danger does this pose for the Odessa port and the grain corridor if Russia starts using such drones against the port infrastructure or the civilian vessels that are sailing in the corridor? And what countermeasures can you take?
There are a few key points here. First, the Russians already had weapons systems, such as naval drones, even before the full-scale invasion began. Second, they had used them before and made several unsuccessful attempts during the full-scale invasion. Finally, it's important to understand which countries are the main destinations for cargo from our grain corridor. The first is the People's Republic of China, the second is Spain, followed by other countries in Europe and the world. So, of course, our enemy fully understands that various economies and other countries are also involved in the operation of our ports.
Okay, Dmytro Pletenchuk, spokesman for the Ukrainian Navy. Thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And now joining me to discuss the latest from Ukraine is Mark McNamee, the co-founder of the Ukraine Business News Network. Hello, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us today here on Ukraine This Week.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yes, now words of condemnation don't stop Russian missiles and drones. Once again, Russia carried out a barbaric attack on Ukraine's capital, killing 21 people at least and wounding dozens more, damaging not only residential buildings but also diplomatic institutions. What does this say? What kind of message is Vladimir Putin trying to send to the rest of the world and even to President Donald Trump by carrying out such horrible attacks?
Well, I would actually disagree with the kind of the conventional explanation being that Russia's trying to scupper the peace talks and all this. I actually think that Russia's doing what Russia always does, which is, since we're at a quite pivotal moment and the West is trying to unite and Trump is making such strong overtures for reaching some sort of ceasefire peace deal, that Putin is simply piling on the pressure. I mean, this is how Russia's historically operated. This is how Putin has always operated. So that's what he's doing. And we should see all of this from Moscow's perspective, whether they're going to Alaska for talks or in Istanbul or in Saudi, or attacks on civilians like we see every day, basically, but this massive attack, of course, the other night, or just the war itself at the front, which we've seen an intensification over the last 6 months. All of these, whether it's negotiations, it's violence, air raids, land battles, these are all just different methods for Putin and the Kremlin to use to achieve their strategic goals. So if they can talk and use negotiations to achieve that, fantastic. If they have to kill dozens of civilians in Kyiv and across the country, that works for them as well. If they have to hit US, EU, UK installations companies, more pressure, and let's see how the West responds. So these are all just different avenues for Russia to advance its interests, pursue its strategic goals, and demonstrate the powers that it has. So that's why we're here today, and we should expect more of the same, because we've seen this since Trump started the ceasefire talks back, after he was elected, before he was inaugurated. Putin has really piled on the pressure, and we're seeing a severe uptick in not just the land attacks, but the air raids across the country on civilians.
Yeah, and what do you think the response from the West should be? We saw the EU building, or the British Council there destroyed in Kyiv, as well as this American company. I've heard that the Bayraktar factory under construction was also hit there near Kyiv. What should the reaction from the West be to attacks like this? Should we just continue to condemn the Russian aggression, or should somebody do something about it?
Yeah, I think we're all tired of hearing how concerned or gravely concerned the West is. What they should do is really quite simple, is give the capabilities to Ukraine to be able to strike deep into Russia and let Russia feel these pressures. And we're seeing, of course, very recently, right here in the last month and a half, these deep strikes, which have had a quite tangible impact, these deep Ukrainian strikes on Russian oil refineries. So take the handcuffs off the United States, give more of these long-range munitions and systems in order to attack Russia deep within the country and hit its infrastructure. Germany, give the Taurus missiles. So I mean, the list is quite long of what we can actually do on the battlefield to push for this. And then the other thing I would say is that, again, looking at this in a more comprehensive way, in the way that the Russians are, that all these various methods are to achieve their strategic goals, we should also be using all these various methods. So, for example, at the negotiating table, Russia doesn't agree to a ceasefire, we punish them for it, instead of Trump basically conceding to them and saying, no problem, we'll continue with the talks, despite the fact that Putin would not agree to a ceasefire for 9 months now. Then show peace through strength, which is what Trump campaigned on and has been talking about for 9 months, but there hasn't really been any strength. So part of that should be intensification of the sanctions, greater alignment of the sanctions amongst all the Western partners, much stronger implementation of those sanctions. These are all tools at the West's disposal that we're still holding back. And so as we hold it back, it reconfirms to Putin that his methods work, right? That he's achieving his purposes. So why not keep attacking and killing civilians every week around the country? Because the West cowers and doesn't actually respond with those tools that we actually do have that could actually turn the balance of the war over time.
Yeah, I agree with you. I also think, though, that when you look at 18 sanctions package, and then you look at how trade has been diverted to, say, Kazakhstan from Europe, and it has increased by thousands of %. I'm actually starting to become a little bit skeptical about what these sanctions can achieve. The strongest ones that Donald Trump has threatened are the secondary sanctions. Of course, he's already sort of tested this a little bit on India, right? So he's added that additional 25% tariff on top of the 25% that was already in play until they get a trade deal going. But India is set to import 10 to 20% more oil next week. Prime Minister Modi pretty much brushed off Donald Trump's attempts at contact over this issue. Mm-hmm. Is this going to be effective, these really strong secondary sanctions? Maybe China will do the same thing that India is doing right now.
Right. It depends upon the devil's in the details. It depends upon how they're implemented so what the sanctions are and how they're implemented. And there's a number of different avenues here. So, I mean, one of the most clear areas is simply going after the shadow fleet. There's, by different estimates, 400 to 600 ships in the shadow fleet. Only about 125 or so are sanctioned by U.S., UK, and the EU. And then you have another couple hundred which are sanctioned independently by those same countries' blocks. So we need greater unification, and then of course implementation of that, and that has had an impact. And I agree with your sentiment that unfortunately, I'm likewise, after 3.5 years of war and quite intense sanctions, that Russia continues to be able to finance and prosecute this war. But we are seeing this year and every month heightened pressure that's intensifying on the Russian economy and financial system, so we can make that much more worse going into next year. And at some point, there is a tipping point for Russia to make some really extreme trade-offs domestically that then could be politically destabilizing for the country. So, yeah, there's a number of sanctions. How are they implemented? Would the tariffs on India actually, over time, would they work? And by the way, there's a number of other ways to manage this. You can put more pressure, for example, on the Saudis and OPEC, have them release more, and they're already doing this, by the way, but release more oil, make it a market share play, and they can sell more of their oil, as they used to in the past, to India and to China. And then you can, in these ways, these various pressures done properly in a unified way. That's the critical point. If EU and the US act together in this, they can put adequate pressure on these different nations and groups, and then just at least reduce the purchases of Russian oil by India and China, which over time then that would cause considerable problems. And over time being a matter of weeks and months, I'm not saying 2-3 years, but in a relatively near future, quite significant problems when you talk about then ruble depreciation and then resurgence of inflation again, and then what happens with interest rates domestically. This would become very, very problematic. So we can do these things and increase and intensify the pressure. Now everybody wants to know, okay, well, what's the point where we could collapse the Russian economy and make them stop this war? That's much farther down the line, and that would take very, very intense sanctions and intensely implemented sanctions to achieve that. But we can start doing this now and start seeing much more pressure on the Russian economy and financial system, and then their ability to prosecute the war that they've been prosecuting.
Indeed. Well, I like the sanctions that Ukraine's imposing themselves on Russian oil by attacking the refineries. Hopefully, we'll see a continuation of that. Mark McNamee, a co-founder of Ukraine Business News Network, thank you so much for joining me today. Appreciate it.
Great. My pleasure. Take care.
And that's all the time we have here on Ukraine This Week. Join us again next week for all the latest developments from the war in Ukraine. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you then. Goodbye.